Hey, my name is Ramirez. I am Frog Bear. You can call me Rami. Now, this has been a very difficult video to start off with, right? I normally upload at 4 a.m. Um, but I just got really sucked into a bunch of research. Because, all right, so this goes back to cybernetics. And so I was doing research on the Macy Foundation, right? But in the process of that, I stopped myself and was wondering, like, does this connect to the Jamaica studies? Does this connect to IBM as a solutions company? I was trying to find connecting dots. Right? Somebody would be like, "Oh, now you're just looking for stuff to prove." But in the process of doing all that, let's just say my research has progressed much further than I thought I was. Right? Because I was looking for a primary source. Okay, not this guy. So I was looking for a primary source on the Jamaica studies, trying to find just primary sources for me at least, right? So I know that I'm like on the right track and I'm not, getting lost in the weeds or anything like that. But I found this record. But in finding this record, it led me to understand something very integral about the very first ERO, the Eugenics Record Office that was stationed out in New York. And I don't know what page it was, probably like 250 something. Either way, what I initially discovered, yeah, was around the time they got an audit. And during that audit, they were pretty much told, like, your office sucks. Like, you've done absolutely nothing to this. Here, finally, the usefulness of the accumulated material would have to be tested on a few selected problems in human genetics to see the basis it formed for actual scientific study. Da da da. I was just reading these documents, only to discover that this whole thing ended pretty terribly. Like the office got closed down. They were pretty much told, like, you need to dissolve. You've done nothing with all this data, and you've completely failed, right? And I'm like, okay, what a catastrophic failure, right? Because apparently there were other scientists making much more advancement in studying human genetics, but in approaching it in a very different manner, right? Because the way that they were approaching it was like, it was pretty dumb. They were like, oh, if you had a father and your father was like, if your father really liked the sea, that means you're really likely to like the sea. Or was it? It was like some stupid anecdote. But either way, I was just reading this. But in reading this, I wanted to discover a bit more on the Macy Foundation, and which was funny, right? These conferences were funded by Josiah Macy Foundation, which had been created by General Marlborough Churchill, a cousin of Winston Churchill. I was like, okay, this is really weird. Kept looking into it, and I found this PDF document that says the history of the Josiah Macy Jr. Foundation. Whatevers. Right? I just kept going down this rabbit hole and trying to figure this out. But in discovering this out, or at least fleshing this out mentally, I progressed further into thinking timeline wise. What are the importance and the significances of the years and the periods of time that this was all occurring? So, right, because all of these people are funding the exact same programs, right? If it isn't the Rockefellers, if it isn't the Carnegies, it's probably one of their close related friends or a different family of prominence that is also looking into this from like a Mendel's perspective. There's a better timeline that I could give you, but not what I wanted to focus on. Primarily what I wanted to focus on was the Mason Foundation at World War II. They even said it, like, Macy Foundation's interests were traumatic shock, closely related to surgical shock or war neurosis, building on the research on psychomatic medicine, supported since 1931. right? And the ERO office didn't close down until 1939. Traumatic shock took a heavy toll on the soldiers in World War I. They basically took a very interested. So the Macy's Foundation took a very large interest in traumatic shock, but then they mentioned the Flexner Report, which is landmark report on medicine education in the United States and Canada, written by this guy in 1910. Aegis of the Carnegie Foundation, whatever. Kept looking into this. I also realized that Marlborough Churchill was, what is it, Prime Minister. A program of entertainment was provided by the committee headed by the Duchess of Marlborough, the American actress Consuelo Vanderbilt, who was married to Churchill's cousin, the ninth Duke of Marlborough. Very interesting. But whatever. Just looking into this stuff and realizing, no, what is it? Okay, somewhere around here, right? This is from Drug, Sex, Cybernetics, and the Josiah Macy's Jr. Foundation. And I want to read this part. Here, Macy and Tavistock saw the possibility of social control on a gigantic scale, the ability to make machines act like humans, and the ability to treat humans as machines. The final accomplishment of H.G. Wells' old Fabian goal of a scientific world order where everything is as neat as a differential equation and unpredictable things such as human creativity never mess things up. With this new and much broader mission, the Macy Groups changed its name. Founder Norbert Weiner coined a new word, cybernetics, from the Greek word of Hellsman, and they became a conference of cybernetics. Now, again, what I found very interesting is I'm trying to find any detailed information on the conferences. You end up discovering the same thing that I said prior, which was part of this derives from the fact that it's still not. Okay, yeah. Part of this, previously mentioned, there is a lack of comprehensive documentation on the Macy's conference. Part of this derives from the fact that the first 5 conferences, by all accounts, the most lively and energizing, were never formally documented with published proceedings. Part of this derives from the fact that it was not until Steve Joshua Hames undertook his massive research decades after the fact that anyone else addressed the Macy's conference as a historical subject. So, just me finding the fact that I can't find anything on the first 5 meetings between all these people. Now, to give you an understanding of what this means, let me give you a broader understanding of the situation.
Gradually, around this nucleus, various other people got sucked in. And pretty well every subject you can think of was represented, with people who were authorities, therefore not scared, therefore willing to expose themselves to this kind of chit-chat. And at this point, we get the Josiah Macy Jr. Foundation moving in a absolutely historic move to me. They sponsored a cybernetic conference among these leading people. There were about 20 of them, every year for 10 years.
Just to give you a bigger context of what this means. And the first 5 conferences, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is self-regulating and technological mechanisms, stimulated neural networks, emulating the calculus or propositional logic, anthropology and how computers might learn how to learn, object perceptions, feedback mechanisms, perceptual differences due to brain damage, deriving ethics from science, compulsive repetitive behavior, technological mechanisms in society, concept of the Gestalt psychology, remember that, tactile and chemical communications among ant soldiers, child psychology, in 1997, child psychology, the field perspective on psychology, analog versus digital approaches to psychological models, 1948, formation of the I or L in language, formal modeling applied to chicken pecking order formation, right? It was Very interesting subjects that were the beginning of these things. But to save my ass and to make sure that I give enough to discredit me.
What I've been trying to suggest to you, Dave, is that systems are subjective phenomena. They're not given in nature. They're whatever you say they are. And if you want to be the chairman of a railway company who sees the stations, and if you want to be the chairman who sees blogs get...
Wrong button. So, right, I'm giving enough to discredit me because these are just subjective things. These are just things that anybody could make assumptions on. Very interesting how I'm discovering all this material and piecing it together in time, right? This is a science of systems. And for those who aren't aware of where this science is most prevalent, let me give you my final antidote. Oh, wrong guy. This guy.
The science of systems. And I put it in this context of, in summary, sharing the story of the 6 blind men looking at the elephant, going through it in very detail, and why, if we don't take a systems approach, we will be ripped apart as a society. And that does.
So, this is the first time I've ever heard of system science. So it was very interesting to me to hear cybernetics be described as a science of systems. It's even more interesting when you look at the timeline effect of all this, right? Because if the ERO office closed down in 1939, and basically the committee that oversaw their audit completely told them, you've biffed this, like you completely fucked up this study. You didn't even actually, because they were cataloging too many factors, and there wasn't really a solutions to figuring all this out. Well, that's where you bring in IBM, and that's where you bring in the Jamaica studies, and that's when you bring up all of this other stuff, right? So it got me to think. This whole thing describes human psychology. The very beginning portions of where they were trying to figure out humanity is what I'm trying to say. And if there's anything that's going to give me, I'm going to keep researching this because I'm trying to figure out if there were attempts into figuring out the human populace from a psychological standpoint. I think I'm going to find my answer here, because this was the only conservative effort on behalf of people who had the money, the capital, and the access to these people would occur. Now, for those, and if it isn't striking a very modern resemblance to you, Event 201, the currency wars, basically anytime a university or a variety of different actors come together to sponsor an event, like John Hopkins, which, by the way, John Hopkins, like the individual, is mentioned in this snippet. And they mention him being a student who was very interested in, they called him a zoologist, essentially. But that's just another calling card of like, oh, you're just a Darwinist in disguise. And, you know, the whole survival of the fittest, da-da-da-da-da. Like, there's much I can go into this extensively. Which is why I found it very difficult to make a video this morning, because it's just like, this is way too much material, and I don't know how to disseminate it all. Because, I wanted to focus on the timeline perspective of things. If one program ended, what were the incentives for these foundations, for these rich elite? What is their incentive in order to fund more of these programs? And you would just have to look at the Jamaica studies, at the South Africa studies. You would also have to look at how IBM was implemented in during Germany's takeover of Europe, and how they utilized that technology to catalog people, to catalog their jobs, their wealth, their assets. Essentially, that's where a lot of the shifting happened with the robbing of certain European locations of their wealth. But very interesting how all of this information is kind of like leaping out at me. And wrong song. What is this?
Gert von Bonin. I haven't mentioned him yet. He is one of the leading world figures in neuroanatomy. He picks this up and he says to Norbert Wiener, who's been trying to make a diagram of the fourth visual layer of the cortex? Getting the frisson?
Essentially describing where one scientist was trying to solve an issue with scan cards and how they're scanned in a computer's mind, and he drew a diagram. That diagram was seen by a different scientist and was like, yo, who's trying to draw the representation of the human model of the human eye? Essentially showing that there was a lot of discovery overlap in the very beginning portions of the Macy's conference. Very interesting how this isn't really discussed, let alone described accurately in any meaningful degree. But I'll keep more in touch with all this as I move forward, because I'm still trying to find words to fully describe all the information that I'm reading. But again, my name is Ramirez. I'll keep you updated on all of this weird stuff that I'm looking into, and stay tuned in for the next episode.